So it seems like there's often this expectation on the left, particularly in online left-wing spaces, that there will be some sort of spontaneous revolution at some point, and all you need to do is leave your house and join this revolution, and then we'll magically just overthrow the government. And this is this weird kind of expectation a lot of people just seem to have. Even if people claim they don't have it, that they're sort of acting like this is just going to happen at some point, that the revolution will come one day, without actually doing the work for, even the basic amount of political organization that a revolution will entail. Revolutions are real. Revolutions do happen throughout history. They still happen today in some countries. There are points where people will overthrow the government, and the ways they do that are never spontaneous, right? I think people, specifically liberals and people who are coming into the left from liberalism, people who are quite young, people who don't really know a lot about the history of revolutions, haven't read a lot of political theory, haven't actually been involved in any kind of organizations in any sort of serious capacity. They don't know that these color revolutions that you see in some places, where these liberals show up in squares or wherever, and they start waving around flags, and then government just got deposed. How did that happen, right? Those are basically coups by usually the US, who sponsor, through clandestine methods, bribe specific government officials to overthrow other government officials, until you eventually just have a state that's more Western oriented rather than evil dictatorship according to the US. It's a dictatorship run by the US instead of a dictatorship that's sort of not serving US interests, right? So that's usually where a color revolution sort of comes in, and that's what I think a lot of people want, because that's what they see on TV, that's what they think revolutions are in sort of the post-Soviet era, because that's what happened with the Soviet Union. You had a lot of these seemingly spontaneous revolutions happen. They called them revolutions, but they weren't real revolutions. There was no real grassroots movement, right? These were heavily astroturfed, heavily top-down revolutions that failed to have any kind of groundswell of popular support in any real sense. They were not brought up by working class, by a real grassroots working class movement. You look at something like the Russian Revolution, you look at something like the Chinese Revolution. These were revolutions led by parties with a foundation among the working classes, right? The parties weren't the be-all and end-all. There were also workers' committees, workers' councils, soldiers' councils, because after World War I, in a lot of countries, you had these people coming off the front lines, very pissed off at how they'd been treated throughout the First World War, the fact that they fought this useless war, and then forming these soldiers' councils, forming these organizations with their peers, and then that led to mutinies, that led to actual revolutions occurring. That's how people build revolutions. They build through actual organization, right? It doesn't happen overnight. It will never happen overnight. You need to actually put in the work. And I'm probably preaching to the choir to quite a few people when I say this, and maybe you are putting in the work, maybe you are part of an organization. I'm not talking to you, because I'm talking to these people who are, they're online, they're not part of any kind of political party, they're not part of their own workplace unions, they're not part of any kind of student group or any kind of serious organization, right? Being part of a Twitter thread, being subscribed to a Twitter page, a Facebook page, whatever, is not the same as actually being part of an organization. Being on a left-wing Discord is not the same as being part of an actual organization. Especially because a lot of these spaces online are so international, so spread out. We are kind of atomized as a movement right now, where we're not actually connected with leftists in our local area. We're connected with leftists that are like continents away from us. You know, I've had this thing where I am on a couple of left-wing discords myself, and I know people from the United States, I know people from Australia, I know people from Canada, all sorts of places where they're leftists, they're organising, they're maybe part of some sort of org locally, maybe they've sort of lapsed out those orgs, maybe they're just sort of only online, right? But there's a mix, right? There's a good mix. But the thing is, I could never like feasibly organise with these people except in online spaces, because we are so far apart, right? We can't just sort of fly over to each other and start plotting the revolution in one of our countries, right? There's firstly expense, firstly, you know, a bunch of legal issues as well, you know, visas and whatnot. But you know, my point is that we focus so much on this online left thing where everyone's sort of spread out, everyone's in different countries, in different towns, different cities. You can't then build a cohesive movement that way. You need to be organising locally within your local area as much as you need to be organising sort of nationally and internationally. You know, I think people are really eager to skip the gun almost, because, you know, we had this period where we did have all these revolutions, we had these socialist states that existed, and we want to go back to that, but we can't just sort of skip ahead. We have to start building again the way they started building, right? You have to go back and say, okay, we need to build like the local workers' councils. We need to build the local movements again before we can start building a national movement, before we can even build an international movement. But people are really want to skip ahead to the national movement. People really want to skip ahead to the international movement. And, you know, not just you know, it's not just about like parties, it's not just about, you know, revolution, long-term stuff. You know, think about the short-term stuff, right? Because that's how you start getting people engaged politically. You know, people, you might be like a very big picture person, very much like we need to seize the means of production, all of that, which is great, yeah. Okay, but that's, you know, long-term plans, unfortunately. You know, as much as we kind of need that yesterday because capitalism has gone really fucking bad, we need to actually baby steps, right? We need to actually work towards that, work to a place where we are powerful enough, where we are strong enough on an organizational level to actually achieve something like that. So, you know, I think about, you know, and this is where, you know, just looking at what campaigns going on in your local area, local campaigns which you want to get involved with, which you might want to get involved with, you know, environmental concerns, big one, gentrification campaigns, anti-gentrification campaigns, another big one. Find where those campaigns are happening, you know, who's involved in those campaigns in your local area. They probably are happening. And if you can't find anything sort of locally, like within your local area, what's going on in your workplace? You know, that's the key place to begin organising. That's always been the key place to begin organising. Organising in your workplace. You know, your workplace isn't perfect, surely, right? And surely you have some grievances. Surely other people in your workplace have some grievances. Talk to your fellow workers, talk to your colleagues, talk to them and ask, you know, do you like the conditions here? The conditions, the working conditions, is the pay good enough? Are you earning enough to make ends meet? You know, things like that. You know, having those basic conversations with each other is the first step towards political organising, because then you say, okay, we don't appreciate like the pay's not enough, the conditions aren't good enough, how do we change that, right? You change that through collective bargaining, you change that through banding together and saying to your boss, we don't like the conditions here, we do not like the pay here, we are going to go out on strike unless you pay us better, right? You know, that's, you know, the very simplistic way that union organising works, but that's basically the first sort of the basic overview, right? But that's the way you start building organization. You look where things around you locally there are problems. You look where there are problems around you. You find other people who are also concerned about those problems, and you work with them. You work with people around you in real life. You actually, in a physical place, you have to be standing with them in a physical place. You organize with them physically in real life, outside of cyberspace, in real space, right? And you build the connections there, and you build a movement. You gain experience through, this low-level movements, these low-level campaigns. And then you can start building to bigger campaigns. Then you can start getting a bit more ambitious. Because, I understand ambition. I'm a very ambitious person. I understand wanting to run before you walk. But we gotta walk. We gotta crawl before we can, get up and walk, and then run, and then sprint, and then fly. You know what I mean? Because I do get it. I do get it, because the situation's getting so much worse day on day. But people just do not want to put in the basic work of getting involved in organizations. And there are a lot of organizations that already exist, so you don't necessarily need to start from the ground up, right? You don't need to reinvent the wheel. So look at what organizations are organizing around you. Some of them are national organizations already, and they're involved in local campaigns. Get to know the people in those campaigns. Get to know the leftists in your area. Get to know the leftists in your province, your state, your region. And I get this is often hard for people who live in more rural areas, right? Because there is this feeling of hostility towards the left in rural areas generally, and everyone's so spread out as well, so it's harder to meet up. People in urban areas, we're a lot more privileged in a sense, because we've got a lot more of us in a more densely populated space. We can find places to meet up. We can find places to talk and organize. There's places to actually stage demonstrations and things, but it is important to see what you can do and consider. You've got to consider your conditions first. If you are a rural area, are there people who work on farms around there that are having a hard time? Are there people who are not being paid the best in local businesses that are having a hard time? These are the people you need to speak to. These are the people you need to talk to. It's not always just about, okay, let's do socialism. It's, okay, what's your problem? Well, or, what problems are you having, rather? What problems are you having, and how can we solve those problems together, right? Not just, okay, you need to, do you follow Marx? Do you follow Kropotkin? Do you follow, I don't know, Luxembourg, whatever? It's about, seeing what people's needs are, as much as trying to make them join an ideological persuasion, right? Seeing what their needs are, and then trying to help them with those needs, and then building solidarity through that. Building solidarity, building a solidarity network, that is the foundation of how you build political organizing, right? You build a left that can actually potentially take power, and it's there's going to be issues, right? There's always going to be issues along the way. There's always going to be problems. You've got to make sure there are concerns about things like racism, things like misogyny, things like queerphobia. You always got to be, because sometimes the people you want to help, the people you want to organize with, aren't always compatible with you, aren't always the greatest people in the world, right? But at a certain point, you got to be like weighing things up and being like, can we put that aside and still work together? Or is it just too hard? Is it just too demanding? Is it just too dangerous? These are questions that are important to ask. But in terms of the long term, it's about when you start working with people, when people start seeing that, we're all on the same side, we're all struggling under the same system of capitalism, then you start solving a lot of those issues. You start resolving a lot of those issues, right? Because at the end of the day, the primary contradiction is class, right? So you need to recognize that we all need to so people will recognize that we all need to sort of band together. We need to put aside a lot of the bullshit, the weird reactionary prejudices, and just work towards the greater goal of actually solving the class struggle, right? Resolving the class struggle. And, I get there's also a lot of disabled people out there who are like, oh, I can't leave the house, I can't organize in a physical capacity, and that's fine. But a lot of all these organizations that already exist, they need people who can do the basic sort of admin work and the basic kind of online stuff as well. So if that's you, and you're not someone who can go to protests and go on picket lines and go and physically do mutual aid networks, maybe you're somebody who knows a little bit about IT. A lot of these orgs have not a great IT team, so they don't have very large IT teams. They might need some support in that capacity, right? They might just need somebody to update the websites. They might just need somebody to update the Twitters, whatever it is. Go and speak to those people, see if they could use your help, right? I think, there's a role for everyone in organizing. There's a role for everyone to partake in. And all these groups, you'll never find a group that's going to turn people away, because, unless you're like a cop or something, because, these groups just really need help. They need support. Find groups that are local, find groups that want your support and have something for you to do, or if those groups don't exist, then yeah, maybe you might need to build your own. Get some friends together that are like-minded, get people that are interested in similar things to you, get some people with some shared grievances, right? Just get some people who are like, if you're concerned about a park being closed down in your local area, if you're concerned about a community centre being closed down, if you're concerned about libraries being underfunded, that's where it starts. That's where the campaigning begins, that's where the experience begins, and that's where the organization can actually become something viable, right? I understand the lure of the idealism, right? The lure of, let's just have this big protest, let's just have a big demo, and then we're gonna show them all, and then because we've got so many numbers, we'll overthrow that's not how that works. It's not how that works. You can't just force the government to do what you want just through standing outside the Parliament building or wherever with a lot of people, right? Ideally that would be how it would work, but you can't do it like that. You need to actually build organizations that directly challenge them in lots of small ways before having a larger network of people that can challenge them in a bigger way, right? Like the revolutions of the past, of the early 20th century, of the 19th century, the 18th century. Those were revolutions where people were actually on the ground together, actually organizing together, actually, training together, and actually had like a very clear goal, a very clear direction, very clear aims, right? I think people are very sort of aimless in what they want now. It's just sort of, they want change. What does change mean? What's change look like? All of that. So yeah, that's just my 5 pence or whatever just on that. And I just think we need to put aside the idea of spontaneity. We need to put away the idea of all of that and just focus on actually building something practical, right? And this isn't just something I've come up with. This is something that's been in left-wing theory for years. I recommend looking into Marx is the obvious one. He's the one who wrote a lot about him and Engels. They wrote a lot about okay, how do you build a movement in a very sort of practical way? Talked about, organising workplaces and things like that. But this was sort of expanded upon by Lenin in a book called What Is to Be Done, that was written, I think, 1903, 1902, something like that. And that's a very, it's a fairly long text, but it's like, it's, I think it's about 100 pages, 200 pages. Not super long, but it's, it's not an article, but it's a good book, it's a good read, just as to what it means to actually build a revolution. And this idea of trying to dispel the ideas of spontaneity, building off of Marx, building off of Engels, and trying to actually, explaining how to actually build something real. And he did build something real, him and a lot of other people in Russia. And the former Russian Empire, they worked and they built something real. And whether we can have long debates about whether the USSR was the best thing in the world or not, but it did exist, and it formed out of workers' councils. It formed out of a real workers' movement. Whatever happened after that, that's a conversation for a different day. But if you want to actually overthrow an empire like Lenin and his revolutionaries overthrew an empire, then that's the sort of work you have to put in. That's what you have to do. So I think that sort of ties it all together quite nicely. What Is to Be Done? It's a good book. Read that. And I'm going to finish off here.